A maid knocked on the wrong hotel door. Shockingly, the guest inside was a millionaire who changed her life. It was 6:45 in the morning at the Ashbury Grand Hotel in New York City, where the marble floors glistened under the soft glow of golden light. The hallways were quiet except for the gentle hum of cleaning carts and the distant murmur of an elevator bell. Florencia Paredes, a 25-year-old maid on her second shift of the day, walked briskly down the long corridor clutching a stack of fresh towels. Her name tag dangled crookedly from her uniform, and a loose strand of chestnut hair had escaped her bun. She whispered to herself, rehearsing the English words she had practiced all week. "Good morning, housekeeping. I am here to clean the room." Her accent bent the syllables, soft and careful. She checked the small notepad in her pocket. Room 2407. She reached the door, took a deep breath, and knocked twice. No answer. She turned the handle. It was unlocked. "Housekeeping," she called again, stepping inside. The scent of cedar and expensive cologne hung in the air. A suitcase stood open on the armchair, and a half-drunk glass of scotch rested on the desk. "Hello?" she said quietly, glancing around. The sound of running water came from the bathroom, followed by the soft thud of footsteps. Then, from behind the frosted glass door, a man appeared, tall, lean, with dark hair still damp from the shower, and only a towel wrapped around his waist. His startled blue eyes met hers. For a second, neither moved. Then her voice cracked. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." She spun toward the door, nearly dropping the towels. The man blinked, his lips twitching between annoyance and amusement. "Apparently, fate wanted me to get up early," he said dryly. Florencia's face flushed scarlet. "They told me 2407. I thought it was ready for cleaning." Her words tangled as she spoke. The man tilted his head, studying her like she was some unexpected puzzle piece in his morning routine. "It is fine," he said finally, his voice calm, deep, British by tone but smooth in an American rhythm. "You are just early." She nodded quickly, fumbling for the door handle again. "I will leave right now." Before she could escape, he spoke again. "Wait," he said. "You dropped something." She turned to see her small sketchbook lying near her feet, its worn leather cover half open. He picked it up, glancing at the pencil drawings inside, quiet sketches of hotel architecture, staircases, and window views. His brows lifted slightly. "These are yours?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered, reaching for it. "They are nothing, just drawings." He hesitated before handing it back. "They are not nothing," he said, then smiled faintly. "You have an eye for structure." She blinked, surprised that he had noticed. For a moment they stood there, the air thick with awkwardness and something else she could not name. Finally she murmured a thank you and hurried out, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Behind her, Quentin Ashcroft watched the door close, still holding the faint scent of detergent and lavender she had left behind. As she pushed her cart toward the elevator, Florencia pressed a hand over her pounding heart. "Great, now you have scared half-naked rich people," she muttered under her breath. She tried to laugh, but her cheeks still burned. She did not know that the man she had just embarrassed herself in front of was not just another guest. He was one of the wealthiest tech investors in New York, a man who owned the very hotel she cleaned. But fate, it seemed, had its own sense of humor. If you believe one wrong door can change everything, stay until the end of this story, because sometimes the smallest mistake can rewrite a life. Now, let us return to our main character. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us continue the story. That same evening, the city lights of New York shimmered against the hotel's glass façade like scattered stars. Florencia finished her shift long after sunset, her feet aching and her uniform faintly scented with detergent. She rode the subway back to Brooklyn, wedged between tired commuters and the quiet hum of the train. Her phone buzzed a reminder for rent due in 3 days. She stared at the screen, then swiped it away. At her small studio apartment, she boiled instant noodles, pulled out her sketchbook, and began to draw. The pencil moved quickly, tracing the outline of a hotel hallway, the shape of a door slightly ajar, and the memory of a man's startled blue eyes. She laughed softly to herself. "You really need to stop thinking about rich strangers, Florencia," she muttered. The next morning came cold and gray. Rain streaked across the hotel's tall windows as she pushed her cleaning cart toward the upper floors. When the elevator doors slid open on level 24, her breath caught. Standing there, checking his watch, was the same man from yesterday, now fully dressed in a charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, and polished shoes that whispered wealth. "Miss Paredes," he said, his voice smooth as if they had met formally. "You dropped this yesterday." In his hand was her sketchbook. Her stomach tightened. "You found it," she said, embarrassed. "I was looking everywhere." He offered a faint smile. "You should not lose it again. You have a good eye for design. Most people overlook symmetry, but you do not." She blinked, unsure what to say. "Thank you, Mr." She hesitated. "Ashcroft," he said simply. "Quentin Ashcroft." She repeated it under her breath like she was trying to memorize it. "Thank you, Mr. Ashcroft." He studied her a moment longer before adding, "I am overseeing a renovation project here. I could use a local assistant to document layout changes. It is not difficult work, just attention to detail. Would you be interested?" Florencia stared at him, surprised. "Me? I clean rooms." "Yes," he said calmly, "but you also see things other people miss. Think about it." With that, he stepped out, leaving her frozen by the elevator, sketchbook clutched to her chest. By the end of the day, she had convinced herself it was just politeness, not a real offer. Yet when she clocked out, a note waited at the front desk. "Meet at the cafe across the street at 5. Question A." Curiosity and fear wrestled inside her. She changed into a clean blouse, brushed her hair, and crossed the street through light drizzle. The cafe was warm, filled with the aroma of roasted coffee and faint jazz. Quentin sat at a corner table, tapping something on his tablet. When he saw her, he stood slightly, gesturing to the seat across from him. "I am glad you came." She sat, nervous hands folded in her lap. "I do not understand why you are offering this." He leaned back, watching her carefully. "Because sometimes talent hides in the quietest places. You have an instinct for structure, and I need someone who notices the small details. You will assist my team 3 times a week. Pay is better than the housekeeping rate." Her heart thudded. "Why me?" He gave a small shrug. "Because you walked through the wrong door and somehow that feels right." She did not know whether to laugh or cry. That night, as she returned home, her phone buzzed again with the same rent reminder. But this time she smiled. Maybe that wrong door had opened something else possibility. She placed the sketchbook on her table and added a new page, a quick pencil outline of a tall building, half finished, reaching toward the sky. Beneath it, she wrote quietly, "Day 1. Meanwhile, in his suite overlooking the city, Quentin stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. On the table beside him lay a copy of the renovation blueprints and a note with her name written across it. He glanced at it once more before turning off the light. He did not know why a maid's drawings had stayed in his mind, but for the first time in years, he was looking forward to tomorrow. The following week unfolded like a quiet miracle that Florencia could barely comprehend. Each morning, she arrived at the Ashbury Grand with her hair neatly tied back, her uniform freshly pressed, and a nervous determination glowing behind her eyes. Instead of pushing the housekeeping cart, she now carried a folder, a measuring tape, and a small digital tablet that Quentin's assistant had lent her. The first task seemed simple: observe, sketch, and document small design flaws in the West Corridor renovation. Yet to her, it felt monumental. She moved slowly, tracing lines with her pencil, comparing symmetry, and noting where light met marble. Every time she turned in a page, Quentin would glance at it without comment, his expression unreadable. But when she thought he was not looking, she would sometimes catch the corner of his mouth curve ever so slightly, as if amused or impressed. During coffee breaks, they talked about things that surprised them both. He asked where she had learned to draw. She told him about her father, a carpenter in Texas who built small wooden houses before a storm took their shop. She had learned by watching him measure beams with chalk and whisper, "Every line must mean something." Her voice softened at the memory, and Quentin said quietly, he would be proud. She looked down, embarrassed by the warmth that spread through her chest. One afternoon, as they stood near the grand staircase, Florencia hesitated before offering a suggestion. "If you moved the railing 3 inches to the left, it would open the line of sight to the chandelier," she said, almost whispering. He turned, curious. "Show me." She took his pen and sketched a quick outline on the blueprint. He studied it, then smiled a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. You have just saved me $10,000 of misalignment. Remind me to keep you close." The comment made her laugh nervously, but it also made her blush. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as a maid, but as someone with purpose. As the days stretched into weeks, their rhythm grew natural. Quentin would arrive early with his black coffee. She would bring her sketchbook and a quiet eagerness. Sometimes he shared fragments of his world, late nights of numbers and deadlines, the loneliness of boardrooms, the endless need to prove himself to people who only saw his fortune. "Success," he said once, "can make you untouchable in all the wrong ways." Florencia listened, nodding. "Maybe," she replied softly, "but kindness can make you reachable again." He stared at her, as if no one had ever said something so simple to him before. Late one evening, after the last meeting ended, he offered her a ride home. The city outside was slick with rain, streetlights stretching across wet pavement. In the quiet hum of the car, she clutched her sketchbook on her lap. "You could have any architect in New York," she said suddenly. "Why hire me?" He looked ahead at the traffic lights glowing red. "Because they build for money," he said. "And you draw for meaning. That is rarer." Lo. When the car stopped near her building, she thanked him, but before stepping out, she turned and said, "You should sleep sometimes, Mr. Ashcroft." He smiled. "Only if you promise not to quit before we finish the lobby." She promised, half laughing, and shut the door. As he drove away, her reflection shimmered faintly in the wet glass. Back in her apartment, she laid out her sketches, tracing the edges with her fingers. For the first time, her drawings felt alive, connected to something bigger than dreams. She opened a fresh page and began to draw not a building but a man standing at a window, coffee in hand, staring at the skyline as if searching for something. She titled it, "The Restless Architect." Across the city, Quentin stood by that very window in his suite, glancing at his phone. The message thread was blank except for one unsent text. "Thank you for reminding me what vision looks like." He deleted it before sending, but the feeling lingered. Something inside him had shifted a quiet awareness that the maid who once knocked on the wrong door had somehow opened another one inside his guarded heart. By mid-April, spring had wrapped New York in soft light and unpredictable rain. The renovation project was halfway complete, and Florencia's role had quietly evolved from assistant to something more essential. She no longer waited for instructions. She anticipated them, moving with confidence through the marble halls that once intimidated her. Each day brought new sketches, new challenges, and moments that blurred the lines between professionalism and something far more personal. Quentin noticed every detail. The way she tilted her head while measuring a column, how she bit her lip when she was thinking, the gentle patience in her tone when she spoke to the workers. She had a steadiness that disarmed him. He was a man used to control meetings, mergers, measurable outcomes, but around her, control felt less like strength and more like a cage he wanted to step out of. One afternoon, heavy rain forced them to stay inside the lobby for a design review. The thunder outside echoed through the tall glass walls. Florencia leaned over the blueprint spread across the table, her pencil tracing gentle corrections. "You see here," she said, "if we add a curve instead of a sharp edge, it will feel softer, more welcoming." Quentin glanced at her hands, noticing the faint calluses from years of cleaning, and then her eyes clear, earnest, impossible to ignore. "You talk about buildings," he said quietly, "like they have hearts." She smiled without looking up. "Maybe they do, or maybe they borrow one from the people who build them." Silence stretched, comfortable and charged. When the power flickered from the storm, she laughed softly. "It feels like the whole city is holding its breath." He found himself laughing too, something he had not done in weeks. The lights returned, but the atmosphere between them had already changed. The next morning she arrived early to find him already there, sleeves rolled up, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You take it with 1 sugar, right?" he asked, handing her a cup. She blinked, surprised he had remembered. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her cold fingers around the warm paper cup. "I thought people like you drink only black coffee," he smirked. "I thought people like you never stopped surprising me." They began sharing more than work small stories, quiet laughter, even comfortable silence. But beneath that warmth was a question neither dared to speak aloud. What happens when the lines blur too much? For Florencia, it was both thrilling and terrifying. For Quentin, it was a lesson in humility, in learning that connection could not be scheduled like a meeting. One evening, while reviewing blueprints in his suite, Florencia accidentally knocked over a framed photo from his desk. It was a picture of a much younger Quentin, standing beside two men in suits. She picked it up. "Your family?" she asked. His face darkened slightly. "Former partners?" he replied. "They tried to take everything once. After that, I learned to trust no one." She placed the photo back carefully. "Then maybe it is time you learned again," she said softly. Her words stayed with him long after she left. That night, he walked the empty corridors of the hotel, watching the lights reflect on the marble. He thought about all he had built, all he had lost, and the quiet maid who now stood at the center of his thoughts. For a man who believed in numbers, she had become the one variable he could not calculate. Days later, as the project neared completion, he called her into the newly restored lobby. The grand chandelier hung above them, scattering light across the polished floor. "You did this," he said, gesturing to the space. "Every line, every color, your influence is here." She looked around, amazed. "I just followed your lead." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You reminded me why I started in the first place." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent call. He turned away, his voice shifting into the cool tone of a businessman. "Yes, tell them the deal is on my desk by noon." When he looked back, Florencia had stepped aside, her smile fading. In that moment, she remembered who he was, a man of glass towers and power meetings, and who she was, a maid who had stumbled into his world by mistake. That night, as rain fell again over the city, Florencia stood by her apartment window, watching lights blur into gold. She whispered to herself, "Wrong door, right dream." But even as she said it, she knew dreams rarely came without a price. And somewhere in the heart of Manhattan, Quentin Ashcroft stared out at the same storm, wondering when business and feeling had begun to collide so dangerously inside him. The next few weeks moved in a rhythm that neither of them could quite define. The renovation was almost finished, and the hotel glowed with new light. For Florencia, every corner of the building felt like a chapter she had quietly helped write. For Quentin, every blueprint and marble tile had become a mirror, reflecting something far more personal. The boundary between employer and employee had thinned until it felt transparent, delicate, and alive. One afternoon, Quentin asked her to accompany him to a client inspection at a new site near Central Park. It was the first time she had seen him outside the hotel in daylight, not as her boss, but as a man navigating the noise of the world. They walked across the wide plaza, wind stirring her hair as she tried to keep pace with his long strides. When she tripped slightly on a loose stone, he caught her elbow. "Careful," he said, steadying her. She laughed nervously. "I am used to floors, not sidewalks this expensive." He smiled, not letting go right away. "Then I will make sure you stay upright." For a brief moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken flickered between them, warm, steady, and dangerous. At the construction site, she moved through the space with natural curiosity, asking questions that caught the attention of the senior architect. When she suggested a change to the entryway design, the man frowned, but Quentin interrupted. "Try her version," he said firmly. "She has an eye for perspective." The architect hesitated, then nodded. Florencia blinked, both humbled and startled. On the ride back, she gazed out the car window, city lights blurring past. "You did not have to defend me," she said quietly. "I only said what I saw," Quentin replied. "And what you saw was right. You belong in those rooms, Florencia, not just cleaning them." That night, she could not sleep. The words replayed over and over, too bright to ignore. She went to her small desk and began to draw again this time. Not buildings, but people. Two figures standing side by side, half in shadow, half in light. Beneath the sketch, she wrote, "Different worlds, same view." The next morning, when she entered the hotel lobby, Quentin was already waiting. He had 2 cups of coffee and a folded envelope on the table. "This is for you," he said, sliding it toward her. Inside was an invitation to the grand reopening gala of the Ashbury Grand. "You have earned a seat at the table you helped create," he said. She hesitated. "A maid at a gala?" He shook his head. "An artist at a gala. You will come, and that is not a request." She smiled faintly. "Then I guess I should find a dress that does not smell like bleach." He laughed softly. "Leave that part to me." The night of the event arrived with an almost cinematic perfection. The ballroom shimmered with crystal lights, polished silver, and the hum of polite laughter. Florencia stood at the entrance, barely recognizing herself in the mirror. Her simple gown, pale blue and elegant, fit her like it had been made for her. She clutched her small purse nervously until Quentin appeared beside her in a black tuxedo. "You clean up well," he said with a teasing smile. She answered, "So do you, Mr. Ashcroft." They entered together, heads turning as they passed. For a while, it felt like a dream music, champagne, laughter, and then the sound of a microphone cut through the noise. The host on stage announced, "Please welcome our special guest, the man behind Ashcroft Capital and the visionary investor of tonight's celebration, Mr. Quentin Ashcroft." The applause rose like thunder. Florencia froze. The words hit her harder than she expected. She turned to him slowly, realization dawning in her eyes. "You own this place?" she whispered. He looked at her, caught off guard, and nodded faintly. "I wanted you to see me as a man, not a name." "Hehat, sank. You let me believe you were just another architect. You let me embarrass myself. You let me trust you." The applause continued behind them, but she barely heard it. "Florencia, please," he said softly, reaching out. She stepped back. "You are not the man I thought you were." Her voice trembled, hurt and disbelief intertwined. She turned and walked away, before he could say another word, leaving him standing under the golden light, surrounded by everything he had built, and suddenly aware that none of it meant anything if she was not there to see it with him. The morning after the gala, the city felt colder, even though the sun was shining. Florencia woke to the sound of rainwater dripping from the window ledge, though it had not rained at all. Her eyes were swollen from the night before, and the blue gown hung silently on the back of her chair like a witness to a mistake she wished she could erase. She replayed his words over and over, the applause echoing in her mind. "Mr. Quentin Ashcroft," the host had said, and the world she thought she knew collapsed into something hollow. She had not just been working with an architect. She had been unknowingly working beside one of the city's most powerful men, a man who had let her build trust on a lie. At the other end of Manhattan, Quentin sat in his penthouse suite, the city stretching out beneath him in a blur of silver light. His phone had buzzed all morning, messages from investors and friends congratulating him on the successful event. He ignored them all. The only message he wanted to see was not there. He replayed the look on her face, the disbelief, the hurt, the way she stepped away from him like he was a stranger. He had meant to protect the fragile connection they had built, to keep it real in a world where everyone only saw him for his wealth. Instead, he had destroyed the one thing he wanted to preserve. 2 days passed in silence. Florencia did not return to work. Her absence spread through the hotel like a whisper. The staff asked about her, but no one knew where she had gone. Finally, one evening, Quentin walked into the service wing where she used to keep her cart and found her name still written in marker on the locker door. On the shelf sat her old housekeeping badge, tucked beside a folded sketch, the design of the lobby they had created together. He held it gently, his thumb tracing the soft pencil lines. He could not let it end like this. He spent the next week trying to find her. Calls to the staff led nowhere, and her phone remained disconnected. Then, one afternoon, he visited the public library near her old address. In a small community art corner, he saw a familiar style of sketching displayed on the bulletin board, clean pencil lines, gentle shading, and under one of the drawings, her signature. Below it, a handwritten note read, "Free art classes for neighborhood kids every weekend." He stood there for a long moment before asking the librarian, "The artist, Florencia Paredes, does she still come here?" The woman nodded. "Every Saturday morning. She brings her own pencils." That weekend, he arrived early, standing quietly near the back of the small classroom. The walls were lined with children's drawings, houses, stars, animals, and among them, one small painting of the hotel lobby she had helped design. Florencia sat at a table surrounded by children, her sleeves rolled up, a faint smudge of charcoal on her cheek. She looked peaceful, exactly as she had always wanted to be. When she finally noticed him, she froze, the color draining from her face. The children kept drawing, unaware of the sudden stillness between them. "I came to return something," he said softly, holding out her sketch of the lobby. "It was never mine." She hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing his. "You should not be here," she said quietly. "This is not your world." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it is the only place I have seen something real in a long time." He paused before adding, "You were right to walk away. I should have trusted you with the truth." She looked down at the paper, then at him. "You built your life on blueprints and deals, Quentin. I built mine on faith. I cannot work for someone I cannot trust." He nodded, his voice low. "Then do not work for me. Work with me. On your own terms." For a long moment neither spoke. The children laughed softly in the background, the sound oddly grounding. Then Florencia said, "If I ever choose to build again, it will not be for profit. It will be for meaning." He smiled sadly. "Then let me be the one to fund meaning." She shook her head but did not walk away this time. The distance between them felt fragile but not impossible. When the class ended, she gathered her supplies. "I need time," she said. "Take all the time you need," he replied. As she turned to leave, he added, "You once told me buildings might have hearts. If that is true, then mine is waiting for you to draw the next line." Florencia stopped in the doorway, not looking back, but her voice carried softly across the room. "Then make sure it does not collapse before I do." And with that, she was gone again, leaving him standing in a room full of children's art, holding the faint hope that forgiveness might one day return like light after a storm. Weeks turned into a quiet rhythm of distance and reflection. Florencia focused on her art classes and her small community projects, finding solace in the laughter of children and the steady scratch of pencils on paper. Life became simpler again, filled with ordinary moments that did not hurt. Yet every now and then she would pause, her thoughts drifting to a man who had once believed he could hide behind half-truths and wealth. Quentin's voice still echoed somewhere in her memory, soft, regretful, unfinished. Across the city, Quentin Ashcroft had not stopped searching for redemption. Work filled his days, but the satisfaction that once came with success had vanished. The Ashbury Grand's reopening had made headlines. Investors praised him, clients sought him, but it all felt meaningless. Late at night, he would stand by the tall windows of his penthouse, looking down at the city lights. They reminded him of her words, "Buildings borrow their hearts from the people who build them." He realized he had built monuments without meaning. One afternoon, a delivery arrived at the Library Arts Center. The children squealed with excitement as boxes were unloaded, fresh sketch pads, brushes, and paints. Florencia was confused until she saw the note taped to one of the boxes. "For the dreamers who draw meaning into walls." A. She sighed, part touched, part conflicted. She had asked him for time, and somehow he had found a way to honor that without crossing her boundaries. That weekend, while she was cleaning up after class, a familiar voice came from the doorway. "You still teach them to see beauty in lines, not price tags?" Quentin stood there, no suit, no arrogance, just jeans and a simple sweater. She froze for a second before saying, "You should not be here." "Maybe not," he replied, stepping closer. "But I promised I would not let the heart collapse." She shook her head, torn between anger and something softer. "You cannot fix everything with money, Quentin." "I know," he said quietly, "but I can start with sincerity." He handed her a rolled-up document. "What is this?" she asked cautiously. "A proposal," he said. "Not for business, but for purpose. I have started a foundation, the Open Frame Project. It funds young artists and architects from working-class backgrounds. The first workshop will be held here, in this very library, under your name." Her eyes widened. "My name?" "It was your idea, Florencia. You told me art should belong to those who need it most. I only built the structure. You gave it a soul." She stared at the document, emotions tangled. "You did all this because you felt guilty?" He smiled sadly. "Because I finally understood what you meant. Wealth without meaning is just a cage made of gold. You freed me from mine." For a long moment neither spoke. The air between them felt fragile again, but no longer cold. Finally, she said, "You cannot buy forgiveness." "I am not trying to," he answered. "I am earning it, one honest act at a time." Her hands trembled as she unrolled the document, scanning the first line. "In partnership with Florencia Paredes, visionary artist and educator." She closed her eyes. "You could have put your name first." He shook his head. "You opened the door. I just walked through it." Silence settled, heavy but not painful. She stepped closer, close enough to see the weariness in his eyes. "If I agree," she said softly, "it will not mean everything is forgiven." "I would not ask that," he replied. "I would only ask for a chance to prove that truth can rebuild what lies once broke." Florencia looked at him for a long time before nodding once. "Then we build, Quentin," she said. "But this time, no secrets, no hidden doors." He smiled, relief flickering in his expression. "Only open frames," he said. When he left that evening, the rain had started again, gentle and steady. Florencia stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. Somewhere inside her, a small crack had begun to heal. Across town, Quentin walked under the same rain, the first real peace he had felt in years settling quietly over him. Neither of them knew where the story would lead, but for the first time, both believed that rebuilding was possible, even after everything had fallen apart. The months that followed unfolded with a quiet steadiness that surprised them both. The open frame project became real, transforming from blueprints into walls filled with laughter, sketches, and second chances. Every weekend, the library buzzed with life. Children painted beside young adults who had once thought their dreams were too expensive to afford. Florencia moved through the space like sunlight, guiding, teaching, encouraging. And though Quentin tried to keep his distance, their paths crossed often. Each time the air carried something unspoken, a mix of gratitude, forgiveness, and the possibility of something still waiting to bloom. One afternoon, Florencia arrived early to prepare materials for a new workshop. When she entered the main hall, she stopped short. The walls were covered with dozens of her students' drawings, carefully framed and displayed like a real gallery. In the center of the room stood Quentin, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of paint on his forearm. He turned when he heard her voice. "You did this?" she asked, eyes wide. "They did this," he corrected. "I only hung the frames." She smiled faintly. "You could have told me." "I wanted it to be a surprise," he said, his tone gentle. "You once dreamed of opening a studio that made people feel at home. Consider this the beginning." "Sanxie." Florencia walked slowly along the walls, tracing each frame with her fingertips. Every piece carried a story: a child's first attempt at shading, a teenager's dream of designing skyscrapers, an elderly man's watercolor of the city skyline. She felt tears prick at the corner of her eyes. "You turned an idea into a heartbeat," she whispered. Quentin stepped closer, his voice low. "You gave it the pulse. I just made sure the world could hear it." "Look, hey." They stood in silence, surrounded by color and warmth. Then Quentin handed her a small envelope. "What is this?" she asked, unfolding it. Inside was an invitation printed on elegant paper. "The art of Florencia Paredes. A private exhibition at the Ashbury Grand Gallery." She froze, her breath catching. "This cannot be real," she said softly. "It is more than real," he replied. "You gave me the courage to build something that matters. Now it is your turn to be seen." Her hands trembled. "Quentin, I cannot." "You can," he said firmly. "Because this city deserves to see the woman who taught it that art does not belong to the rich, it belongs to the human heart." His words carried a conviction that silenced her doubts. "You kept my sketches," she said after a moment, realizing what this meant. "Every single one," he admitted. "Even the napkin drawings you thought I threw away." The night of the exhibition arrived beneath a sky painted in shades of violet and silver. The Ashbury Grand's gallery glowed softly, transformed into a temple of color and light. Guests wandered through, admiring Florencia's worker pencil sketches of city streets, her watercolor portraits of the people who lived in them, her designs that blended structure with soul. For once, she was not the maid cleaning the floors. She was the artist everyone had come to see. Quentin watched from a distance, pride and tenderness shining quietly in his eyes. When the crowd thinned, she found him standing by one of her earliest sketches, the hotel lobby they had once redesigned together. "I cannot believe this is happening," she said. "Believe it," he replied, "because you built this as much as I did, maybe more." She smiled, emotion trembling in her voice. "I thought I lost everything the night of the gala, but maybe I had to lose that illusion to find the truth." He nodded. "Sometimes, the heart needs to break to let the light in." Meadow. As the evening drew to a close, the lights dimmed, and the last guests drifted out. Florencia turned to Quentin. "You never stop building, do you?" He looked at her with quiet sincerity. "Not when it is something worth keeping." She stepped closer, their reflection merging in the gallery's glass wall. "Then maybe this time," she said softly, "we build something that cannot be bought." He smiled, reaching out his hand, not as a businessman, but as a man who had finally learned what building truly meant. And as her fingers found his, the city outside shimmered like it was blessing the moment they both realized. Some doors, once opened by mistake, were never meant to close again. A year passed, and the city moved through its seasons like a living canvas painted in shifting colors. The Ashbury Grand Gallery had become more than a place for art. It had become a symbol of second chances. Every few months, A new wave of young artists showcased their work under the banner of the Open Frame Project, and every time, Florencia stood quietly in the back, proud but humble, watching others find their voices. She still lived simply, still taught her weekend classes, still carried her old sketchbook wherever she went. Only now, its pages were filled not with dreams, but with memories that had come true. One evening, as the sun melted into the Hudson River, Quentin walked into the library where it had all begun. The light from the windows bathed the room in gold. Florencia sat on the floor, surrounded by children, helping them mix colors. She looked up, smiling when she saw him. "You still show up unannounced," she said. He grinned. "It is the only way I can see the real you." He crouched beside her, picking up a stray crayon. "They are getting better," he said, nodding at the children's paintings. "That is because they believe in themselves now," she replied softly. "Belief changes everything." "It does," he said, looking at her. "You taught me that." When class ended, they stepped outside. The street buzzed with evening life music from a nearby cafe, the scent of roasted chestnuts drifting through the air. Quentin stopped beside a lamppost, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Before you say anything," he said, half smiling, "it is not a business proposal." She laughed, that same laugh he had missed for months. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring, engraved with a line she instantly recognized: "Wrong door, right life." Her eyes filled with tears. "Quentin," she whispered, "you do not have to do this." "I know," he said, taking her hand gently. "But I want to, not because of guilt or grand gestures, because you are the only person who ever knocked down the walls I built around myself. You reminded me that love, like art, does not belong to the highest bidder. It belongs to those brave enough to create it." She looked at the ring, then at him, and the city lights seemed to soften around them. "I never imagined this," she said quietly. "Neither did I," he admitted. "But maybe the best stories are the ones we never plan." Her fingers trembled as she touched the ring. "You know this does not erase the past," she said. "Good," he replied, "because I do not want to erase it. Every mistake brought me to this moment." The sounds of the city faded until all she could hear was the rhythm of her own heartbeat. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The world outside continued, cars passing, laughter echoing. But for them, everything had narrowed to the quiet truth between two people who had built something real out of everything broken. Months later, they married in a small ceremony on the rooftop of the Ashbury Grand, where the story had first begun. There were no reporters, no extravagant guests, just close friends, the staff who had watched their journey unfold, and the children who had once colored their world with crayons. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, Florencia stood beside Quentin, her hand resting against his chest. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. He smiled. "Every day," he said. "Because you knocked on the wrong door, but you opened the right life." She laughed softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Best mistake we ever made." Below them, the city shimmered, alive and endless, and the wind carried her final whisper into the night, a promise that love, when built on truth, does not fade like paint. It endures, steady and strong, like the foundations they had rebuilt together.